The Fables of Aesop. In Part 2 of the complete collection, we'll be reading from the edition published by Hodder and Stoughton in London in 1909. We'll be reading all the stories between the frogs asking for a king and the father and his two daughters. The Fables of Aesop. The Frogs Asking for a King. The frogs, grieved at having no established ruler, sent ambassadors to Jupiter entreating for a king. He, perceiving their simplicity, cast down a huge log into the lake. The frogs, terrified at the splash occasioned by its fall, hid themselves in the depths of the pool. But no sooner did they see that the huge log continued motionless than they swam again to the top of the water, dismissed their fears, and came so to despise it as to climb up and to squat upon it. After some time they began to think themselves ill-treated in the appointment of so inert a ruler, and sent a second deputation to Jupiter to pray that he would set them over with another sovereign. He then gave them an eel to govern them. When the frogs discovered his easy good nature, they yet a third time sent to Jupiter to beg that he would once more choose for them another king. Jupiter, displeased at their complaints, sent a heron, preyed upon the frogs day by day, till there were none left to croak upon the lake. The porker, the sheep, and the goat. A young pig was shut up in a fold yard with a goat and a sheep. On one occasion the shepherd laid hold of him, when he grunted and squeaked and resisted violently. The sheep and the goat complained of his distressing cries and said, "He often handles us, and we do not cry out." To this he replied, "Your handling and mine are very different things. He catches you only by your wool or your milk, but he lays hold of me for my very life." The Ass and the Grasshopper. An ass, having heard some grasshoppers chirping, was highly enchanted, and desiring to possess the same charms of melody, demanded what sort of food they lived on to give them such a beautiful voice. They replied, "The dew." The ass resolved that he would only live upon dew, and in a short time died of hunger. The Boy and his Filberts. A boy put his hand into a pitcher of filberts. He grasped as many as he could possibly hold, but when he endeavored to pull out his hand, he was prevented from doing so by the neck of the pitcher. Unwilling to lose his filberts, and yet unable to withdraw his hand, he burst into tears and bitterly lamented his disappointment. A bystander said to him, "Be satisfied with half the quantity, and you will readily draw out your hand. Do not attempt too much at once." The Laborer and the Snake. A snake, having made his hole close to the porch of a cottage, inflicted a severe bite on the cottager's infant son, of which he died, to the great grief of his parents. The father resolved to kill the snake, and the next day, on its coming out of its hole for food, took up his axe, but making too much haste to hit him, as he wiggled away, missed his head, and cut off only the end of his tail. After some time, the cottager, afraid lest the snake should bite him also, endeavored to make peace, and placed some bread and salt in his hole. The snake, slightly hissing, said, "There can henceforth be no peace between us, for whenever I see you I shall remember the loss of my tail, and whenever you see me you will be thinking of the death of your son." No one truly forgets injuries in the presence of him who caused the injury. The Ass and the Mule. A muleteer set forth on a journey, driving before him an ass and a mule, both well laden. The ass, as long as he traveled along the plain, carried his load with ease. But when he began to ascend the steep path of the mountain, he felt his load to be more than he could bear. He entreated his companions to relieve him of a small portion, that he might carry home the rest. But the mule paid no attention to the request. The ass shortly afterwards fell down dead under his burden. The muleteer, not knowing what else to do in so wild a region, placed upon the mule the load carried by the ass in addition to his own, and at the top of all placed the hide of the ass after he had flayed him. The mule, groaning beneath his heavy burden, said thus to himself, "I am treated according to my deserts. If I had only been willing to assist the ass a little in his need, I should not now be bearing, together with his burden, himself as well." The Horse and Groom. A groom used to spend whole days in currycombing and rubbing down his horse, but at the same time stole his oats and sold them for his own profit. "Alas," said the horse, "if you really wish me to be in good condition, you should groom me less and feed me more." Honesty is the best policy. The Ass and the Lapdog. A man had an ass and a Maltese lapdog, very great beauty. The ass was left in a stable and had plenty of oats and hay to eat, just as any other ass would. The lapdog knew many tricks and was a great favorite with his master, who often fondled him and seldom went out to dine or to sup without bringing him home some tidbit to eat, when he frisked and jumped about him in a manner pleasant to see. The ass, on the contrary, had much work to do in grinding the corn mill and in carrying wood from the forest or burdens from the farm. He often lamented his own hard fate and contrasted it with the luxury and idleness of the lapdog, till at last one day he broke his cords and halter and galloped into his master's house, kicking up his heels without measure and frisking and fawning as well as he could. He next tried to jump about his master as he had seen the lapdog do, but he broke the table and smashed all the dishes. He then attempted to lick his master and jumped upon his back. The servants, hearing the strange hubbub and perceiving the danger of their master, quickly relieved him and drove out the ass to his stable with kicks and clubs and cuffs. The ass, as he returned to his stall, beaten nearly to death, thus lamented, "I have brought it all on myself. Why could I have not been contented to labor with my companions, and not wish to be idle all the day like that useless little lapdog?" The Monkeys and Their Mother. The monkey, it is said, has 2 young ones at a birth. The mother fondles one and nurtures it with the greatest affection and care, but hates and neglects the other. It happened once upon a time that the young one, which was caressed and loved, was smothered by the too great affection of the mother, while the despised one was nurtured and reared in spite of the neglect to which it was exposed. The best intentions will not always ensure success. The Lion, the Mouse, and the Fox. A lion, fatigued by the heat of a summer's day, fell fast asleep in his den. A mouse ran over his mane and ears and woke him from his slumbers. He rose up and shook himself in great wrath and searched every corner of his den to find the mouse. A fox, seeing him, said, "A fine lion you are, to be frightened of a mouse." "'Tis not the mouse I fear," said the lion. "I resent his familiarity and ill-breeding." Little liberties are great offenses. The Shepherd's Boy and Wolf. A shepherd boy, who watched a flock of sheep near a village, brought out the villagers 3 or 4 times by crying out, "Wolf! Wolf!" and when his neighbors came to help him, laughed at them for their pains. The wolf, however, did truly come at last. The shepherd boy, now really alarmed, shouted in an agony of terror, "Pray, do come and help me!" But no one paid any heed to his cries, nor rendered any assistance. The wolf, having no cause of fear, took it easily and lacerated or destroyed the whole flock. There is no believing a liar, even when he speaks the truth. The Mischievous Dog. A dog used to run up quietly to the heels of everyone he met and to bite them without notice. The dog grew proud of his bell and went tinkling it all over the marketplace. An old hound said to him, "Why do you make such an exhibition of yourself? That bell that you carry is not, believe me, any order of merit, but on the contrary, a mark of disgrace, a public notice to all men to avoid you as an ill-mannered dog." Notoriety is often mistaken for fame. The Boys and His Frogs. Some boys, playing near a pond, saw a number of frogs in the water and began to pelt them with stones. They killed several of them, when one of the frogs, lifting his head out of the water, cried out, "Pray stop, my boys. What is sport to you is death to us." The Salt Merchant and His Ass. A peddler, dealing in salt, drove his ass to the seashore to buy salt. His road home lay across a stream, in passing which his ass, making a false step, fell by accident into the water, and rose up again with his load considerably lighter as the water melted the salt. The peddler retraced his steps and refilled his panniers with a large quantity of salt, larger than before. When he came again to the stream, the ass fell down on purpose in the same spot, and regaining his feet with the weight of his load much diminished, brayed triumphantly as if he had obtained what he desired. The peddler saw through his trick and drove him for the 3rd time to the coast, where he bought a cargo of sponges instead of salt. The ass, again playing the knave, when he reached the stream, fell down on purpose, and when the sponges became swollen with water, his load was very greatly increased, and thus his trick recoiled on himself in fitting to his back a double burden. The Astronomer. An astronomer used to go out of a night to observe the stars. One evening, as he wandered through the suburbs with his whole attention fixed on the sky, he fell unawares into a deep well. While he lamented and bewailed his sores and bruises and cried loudly for help, a neighbor ran to the well and, learning what had happened, said, "Harkye, old fellow, why, in striving to pry into what is in heaven, do you not manage to see what is on earth?" The Goatherd and the Wild Goats. A goatherd, driving his flock from their pasture at eventide, found some wild goats mingled among them, and shut them up together with his own for the night. On the morrow it snowed very hard, so that he could not take the herd to their usual feeding places, but was obliged to keep them in the fold. He gave his own goats just sufficient food to keep them alive, but he fed the strangers more abundantly, in the hope of enticing them to stay with him and making them his own. When the thaw set in, he led them all out to feed, and the wild goats scampered away as fast as they could to the mountains. The goatherd taxed them with their ingratitude in leaving him, when during the storm he had taken more care of them than of his own herd. One of them, turning around, said to him, "That is the very reason why we are so cautious. For if you yesterday treated us better than the goats you have had so long, it is plain also that if others came after us, you would, in the same manner, prefer them to ourselves. Old friends cannot with impunity be sacrificed for new ones." The Boy and the Nettles. A boy was stung by a nettle. He ran home and told his mother, saying, "Although it pains me so much, I did but touch it ever so gently." "That was just it," said his mother, "which caused it to sting you. The next time you touch a nettle, grasp it boldly, and it will be soft as silk to your hand, and not in the least hurt you. Whatever you do, do with all your might." The Wolves and the Sheep. "Why should there always be internecine and implacable warfare between us?" said the wolves to the sheep. "Those evil-disposed dogs have much to answer for. They always bark whenever we approach you and attack us before we have done any harm. If you would only dismiss them from your heels, there might soon be treaties of peace and of reconciliation between us." The sheep, poor silly creatures, were easily beguiled and dismissed the dogs. The wolves destroyed the unguarded flock at their own pleasure. The Man and His Two Sweethearts. A middle-aged man, whose hair had begun to turn gray, courted two women at the same time. One of them was young, and the other well advanced in years. The elder woman, ashamed to be courted by a man younger than herself, made a point, whenever her admirer visited her, to pull out some portion of his black hairs. The younger, on the contrary, not wishing to become the wife of an old man, was equally zealous in removing every gray hair she could find. Thus it came to pass that between them both he very soon found that he had not a hair left on his head. Those who seek to please everybody please nobody. The Sick Stag. A sick stag lay down in a quiet corner of its pasture ground. His companions came in great numbers to inquire after his health, and each one helped him to a share of the food which had been placed for his use, so that he died, not from his sickness, but from the failure of the means of the living. Evil companions bring more hurt than profit. The Cat and the Birds. The cat, hearing that the birds in a certain aviary were ailing, dressed himself up as a physician, and taking with him his cane and the instruments becoming his profession, went to the aviary, knocked at the door, and inquired of the inmates how they all did, saying that if they were ill, he would be happy to prescribe for them and cure them. They replied, "We are all very well, and shall continue so if you will only be good enough to go away and leave us as we are." The Kid and the Wolf. A kid standing on the roof of a house out of harm's way saw a wolf passing by and immediately began to taunt and revile him. The wolf, looking up, said, "Sirrah, I hear thee, but it is not thou who mockest me, but the roof on which thou art standing." Time and place often give the advantage to the weak over the strong. The Cock and the Jewel. A cock, scratching for food for himself and his hens, found a precious stone, on which he said, "If your owner had found thee, and not I, he would have taken thee up, and have set thee in thy first estate. But I have found thee for no purpose. I would rather have one barley corn than all the jewels in the world." The Fox Who Had Lost His Tail. A fox caught in a trap escaped with the loss of his brush, henceforth feeling his life a burden from the shame and ridicule to which he was exposed. He schemed to bring all the other foxes into a like condition with himself, that in the common loss he might the better conceal his own deprivation. He assembled a good many foxes, and publicly advised them to cut off their tails, saying that they would not only look much better without them, but they would get rid of the weight of the brush, which was a very great inconvenience. One of them, interrupting him, said, "If you had not yourself lost your tail, my friend, you would not thus counsel us." The Vain Jackdaw. Jupiter determined, it is said, to create a sovereign over the birds, and made proclamation that on a certain day they should all present themselves before him. Then he would himself choose the most beautiful among them to be king. The jackdaw, knowing his own ugliness, searched through the woods and fields and collected the feathers which had fallen from the wings of his companions, and stuck them in all parts of his body, hoping thereby to make himself the most beautiful of all. When the appointed day arrived and the birds had assembled before Jupiter, the jackdaw also made his appearance in his many feathered finery. On Jupiter proposing to make him king, on account of the beauty of his plumage, the birds indignantly protested, and each plucking from him his own feathers, the jackdaw again was nothing but a jackdaw. The Farmer and His Sons. A farmer, being on the point of death, wished to ensure from his own sons the same attention to his farm as he had himself given it. He called them to his bedside and said, "My sons, there is a great treasure hid in one of my vineyards." The sons, after his death, took their spades and mattocks and carefully dug over every portion of their land. They found no treasure, but the vines repaid their labor by an extraordinary and superabundant crop. The Heifer and the Ox. A heifer saw an ox hard at work harnessed to a plow, and tormented him with reflections on his unhappy fate in being compelled to labor. Shortly afterwards, at the harvest home, the owner released the ox from his yoke, but bound the heifer with cords, and led him away to the altar to be slain in honor of the festival. The ox saw what was being done, and said with a smile to the heifer, "For this you were allowed to live in idleness, because you were presently to be sacrificed." The Ox and the Frog. An ox, drinking at a pool, trod on a brood of young frogs, and crushed one of them to death. The mother, coming up and missing one of her sons, inquired of his brothers what had become of him. "He is dead, dear mother, for just now a very huge beast with 4 great feet came to the pool and crushed him to death with his cloven heel." The frog, puffing herself out, inquired if the beast was as big as that in size. "Cease, mother, to puff yourself out," said her son, "and do not be angry, for you would, I assure you, sooner burst than successfully imitate the hugeness of that monster." The Old Woman and the Physician. An old woman, having lost the use of her eyes, called in a physician to heal them, and made this bargain with him in the presence of witnesses, that if he should cure her blindness, he should receive from her a sum of money, but if her infirmity remained, she should give him nothing. This agreement being entered into, the physician, time after time, applied his salve to her eyes, and on every visit taking something away, stole little by little all her property, and when he had got all she had, he healed her, and demanded the promised payment. The old woman, when she recovered her sight, and saw none of her goods in her house, would give him nothing. The physician insisted on his claim, and as she still refused, summoned her before the archons. The old woman, standing up in the court, thus spoke, "This man here speaks in the truth of what he says, for I did promise to give him a sum of money if I should ever recover my sight, but if I continued blind, I was to give him nothing. Now he declares that I am healed. I, on the contrary, affirm that I am still blind, for when I lost the use of my eyes, I saw in my house various chattels and valuable goods, but now, though he swears I am cured of my blindness, I am not able to see a single thing in it." The Fighting Cocks and the Eagle. 2 gamecocks were fiercely fighting for the mastery of the farmyard. One at last put the other to flight. The vanquished cock skulked away and hid himself in a quiet corner. The conqueror, flying up to a high wall, flapped his wings and crowed exultingly with all his might. An eagle, sailing through the air, pounced upon him and carried him off in his talons. The vanquished cock immediately came out of his corner and ruled henceforth with undisputed mastery. Pride goes before destruction. The Charger and the Miller. A charger, feeling the infirmities of age, betook him to a mill instead of going out to battle. But when he was compelled to grind instead of serving in the wars, he bewailed his change of fortune and called to mind his former state, saying, "Ah, miller, I had indeed to go a-campaigning before, but I was barbed from counter to tail, and a man went along to groom me. And now I cannot tell what ailed me to prefer the mill before the battle." "Forbear," said the miller to him, harping on what was of yore, for it is the common lot of mortals to sustain the ups and downs of fortunes. The Fox and the Monkey. A monkey once danced in an assembly of the beasts, and so pleased them all by his performance that they elected him their king. A fox, envying him the honor, discovered a piece of meat lying in a trap, and leading the monkey to the place where it was, said that she had found a store, but he had not used it, but had kept it for him as a treasure trove of his kingdom, and counseled him to lay hold of it. The monkey approached carelessly, and was caught in the trap, and on his accusing the fox of purposely leading him into the snare, she replied, "O monkey, and are you, with such a mind as yours, going to be king over the beasts?" The Horse and His Rider. A horse soldier took the utmost pains with his charger. As long as the war lasted, he looked upon him as his fellow helper in all emergencies, and fed him carefully with hay and corn. When the war was over, he only allowed him chaff to eat, and made him carry heavy loads of wood, and subjected him to much slavish drudgery and ill-treatment. War, however, being again proclaimed, and the trumpet summoning him to the standard, the soldier put on his charger, its military trappings, and mounted, being clad in his heavy coat of mail. The horse fell down straightway under the weight, no longer equal to the burden, and said to his master, "You must now even go to the war on foot, for you have transferred me from a horse into an ass, and how can you expect that I can again turn in a moment from an ass to a horse?" The Belly and the Members. The members of the body rebelled against the belly, and said, "Why should we perpetually be engaged in administering to your wants, while you do nothing but take your rest and enjoy yourself in luxury and self-indulgence?" The members carried out their resolve, and refused their assistance to the body. The whole body quickly became debilitated, and the hands, feet, mouth, and eyes, when too late, repented of their folly. The Vine and the Goat. A vine was luxuriant in the time of vintage with leaves and grapes. A goat, passing by, nibbled its young tendrils and its leaves. The vine addressed him and said, "Why do you thus injure me without a cause, and crop my leaves? Is there no young grass left? But I shall not have to wait long for my just revenge, for if you should crop my leaves and cut me down to my root, I shall provide the wine to pour over you when you are led as a victim to the sacrifice." Jupiter and the Monkey. Jupiter issued a proclamation to all the beasts of the forest, and promised a royal reward to the ones whose offspring should be deemed the handsomest. The monkey came with the rest, and presented, with all a mother's tenderness, a flat-nosed, hairless, ill-featured young monkey as a candidate for the promised reward. A general laugh saluted her on the presentation of her son. She resolutely said, "I know not whether Jupiter will allow the prize to my son, but I do know this, that he is, at least in the eyes of his mother, the dearest, handsomest, and most beautiful of all." The Widow and Her Little Maidens. A widow woman, fond of cleaning, had 2 little maidens to wait on her. She was in the habit of waking them early in the morning at cock-crow. The maidens, being aggrieved by such excessive labor, resolved to kill the cock who roused their mistress so early. When they had done this, they found that they had only prepared for themselves greater troubles, for their mistress, no longer hearing the hour from the cock, woke them up in their work in the middle of the night. The Hawk, the Kite, and the Pigeons. The pigeons, terrified by the appearance of a kite, called upon the hawk to defend them. He at once consented. When they had admitted him into their cote, they found that he made more havoc and slew a larger number of them in one day than the kite could pounce upon in a whole year. Avoid a remedy that is worse than the disease. The Dolphins, the Whales, and the Sprat. The dolphins and whales waged a fierce warfare with each other. When the battle was at its height, a sprat lifted its head out of the waves and said that he would reconcile their differences if they would accept him as an umpire. One of the dolphins said, "We would far rather be destroyed in our battle with each other than admit any interference from you in our affairs." The Swallow, the Serpent, and the Court of Justice. A swallow, returning from abroad, and ever fond of dwelling with men, built herself a nest in the wall of a court of justice, and there hatched 7 young birds. A serpent, gliding past the nest from its hole in the wall, ate up the young unfledged nestlings. The swallow, finding her nest empty, lamented greatly, and exclaimed, "Woe to me, a stranger, that in this place where all others' rights are protected, I alone should suffer wrong." The 2 Pots. A river carried down in its stream 2 pots, one made of earthenware and the other of brass. The earthen pot said to the brass pot, "Pray keep at a distance, and do not come near me, for if you touch me ever so slightly, I shall be broken in pieces, and besides, I by no means wish to come near you." Equals make the best friends. The Shepherd and the Wolf. A shepherd once found the whelp of a wolf and brought it up, and after a while taught it to steal lambs from the neighboring flocks. The wolf, having shown himself an apt pupil, said to the shepherd, "Since you have taught me to steal, you must keep a sharp lookout, or you will lose some of your own flock." The Crab and its Mother. A crab said to her son, "Why do you walk so one-sided, my child? It is far more becoming to go straight forward." The young crab replied, "Quite true, dear mother, and if you will show me the straight way, I will promise to walk in it." The mother tried in vain, and submitted without remonstrance to the reproof of her child. Example is more powerful than precept. The Father and his 2 Daughters. A man had 2 daughters, the one married to a gardener, and the other to a tile maker. After a while he went to the daughter who had married the gardener, and inquired how she was, and how all things went with her. She said, "All things are prospering with me. I have only one wish, that there may be a heavy fall of rain, in order that the plants may be well watered." Not long after he went to the daughter who had married the tile maker, and likewise inquired of how she fared. She replied, "I want nothing, and have only one wish, that the dry weather may continue, and the sun shine bright and hot, so that the bricks might be dried." He said to her, "If your sister wishes for rain, and you for dry weather, with which of the 2 am I to join my wishes?" We'll have lots and lots more Aesop's Fables in Part 3. Good night, Nora.